Hello, everybody. I don't have Sotek with me. I feel a little bit naked and unready and So we were supposed to be doing Skull Taker today, that great champion of Khorne. Sotek and I waxing lyrical about all that blood god goodness. But sadly to say, that's not going to be happening. First thing that I do need to ask though is, can I be heard? Could somebody drop a comment saying that I can't be heard clearly? That would be lovely. But beyond that, I think we should just dive into an unplanned, unexpected, background slightly fuzzy because I didn't get everything ready or prepared. Ask me anything. With that being the case, let's just open the floor. If you have any burning questions that you have at all, drop them now into the comments. If you've got anything you would like to know about Warhammer or about Lawhammer, the campaign that we're running just now, or possibly Dark Deeds, that absolutely marvelous game, which I will slide by your eyes right now. If you want to know something about that, do ask a question. If there is indeed anything about lore of any kinds that I've been involved with, perhaps something that I worked with in the past, maybe something with Critical Role or with alternatively Green Ronin or something else, feel free to drop a question into the comments. Already we've got a bunch of comments coming in. I will be taking them as they come, and let's see what the first ones are. I'm going to have to adjust my screen slightly. You can tell how unprepared I am for today to make sure that I can see everything that's coming in. And here we go. Right, let's start at the very beginning. Quintus pops in and says, I only have 2 questions, Andy. Good to hear. How are you, the Law Clan and the other Lawhammerers doing? We're doing pretty well. We're really glad to be back role-playing last Friday. That episode's currently being uploaded at the moment by Erin, who has done all the production whiz-bang in the background. And I'll be honest, I wasn't as well as I could have been last Friday, and I hope it didn't show too much. I was really flagging near the end, but we got through all the way through, and today I'm feeling much better. Sadly, Sotek is not, which is why we're not live with Sotek this week, which is deeply disappointing. Poor chap. I hope you're okay out there, Sotek, in your deathbed with Nurgle sitting on your shoulder, poking you with little Nurglings. And what god do I have to venerate to give you all some protection from the Great Unclean One? Perhaps the Great Unclean One himself will help, or maybe you should turn to someone like Shalia. That may help. Richard! Hey, Richard. The player can get corruption out of character. What are the risks to viewers' chat, and what agency might they have? So this is an interesting question for the Lawhammer game that I'm currently playing over on YouTube every Monday when we post the episodes, or alternatively when we do them live on Twitch on the Fridays. And as was noted by a few of the players rather disappointingly, it is possible that the characters can get corruption points for some of the things that their players have done during play. So the question here is, what are the risks to the viewers? Well, that's a good question. I don't know. What potential corruption could pour into your eyes should you watch Lawhammer? And the chat, and what agency they have. So agency is an interesting thing. Ultimately, when it comes to the game, the core agency lies with the players and what they are doing to interact with the story. I won't go into any great depth as to how the various tools and mechanisms that I have in place are being deployed, other than to say there are tools and mechanisms, and yes, agency does not just lie with the players, it also lies to a smaller degree with the viewers, but I will not confirm nor deny how that works. Hey Sean, thanks very much for the super chat, greatly appreciated. And on that, if anyone super chats, we'll be bringing those up first from now on as we go along, just to make sure that anyone that wants to contribute towards the channel and our various cameras or anything else that we've got set up over on this side, we will gladly accept those first. Gnomes and the Dawi, interesting interaction. Yeah, that's going to be fun. So if you have watched our most recent episode, which was last Friday of Lawhammer, you'll be aware that the gnomes raised their head right at the very end for the very first time. So it's going to be, I think, a very interesting show, particularly because a certain red-crested dwarf and a blonde-haired human might have popped up at the end of that, as well as an airship and a bloody mad slayer. So yeah, we've got quite a fun episode popping up there. Popping down to Agar89, thank you very much for the super chat, greatly appreciated. Hi Andy, hello back in turn. Oh, you bought Dark Deeds! Oh, marvellous. Also sort of love with your ever chosen being created her eye, which might have some of its sights ending with seeing a giant greenskin forehead head, one that also has one eye. yeah, that's certainly a vision for the future. Thanks. Well, first, thanks for the super chat, and thanks for buying Dark Deeds. Once you've given it a go, do please pop over to BoardGameGeek.com and leave a review over there if you can. And indeed, if anyone's out there watching us who has already purchased a copy of Dark Deeds and you haven't bought it, do make sure you go do. If you could drop a review over at BoardGameGeek.com, that'd be amazing, because we're going to be doing an advert, and Mark Gibbons is planning to build up a big ad drawing quotations from Board Game Geek off it. So if you'd like to see your advert or your quotation on our advert, then do go over to BoardGameGeek.com and drop in a review. Now, thanks so much for that. It's super appreciated. Snowsith. What do you imagine most of the roofs of Altdorf being made out of and or look like? Do you picture a building looking just like a typical fantasy building, painting a bunch of 3D printed terrain? So this is something that has popped up, strangely enough, more than once, and indeed it was important. We have an answer for some parts of this for a plot point that was being organized for the Enemy Within campaign. The Enemy Within campaign has a prophecy concerning the Great White Walls and them coming tumbling down. And the Great White Walls being a reference to the White Walls of Altdorf, which was originally back to an old John Blanche painting, which presented them in that fashion and used terracotta style tiles for the roofing there, with the slate tiles that you might also be aware of, that grey blue colour. That you're often seeing in old world buildings, more left for the more northern versions. So Altdorf broadly uses terracotta tiles and oranges much more than it uses slates, although it does ship in different types of stone from pardon me, from across the empire. And you'll find that makeshift wooden roofs are in place. A whole host of wattle and daubie muddy type things are also in place too, because Altdorf is a city of many different flavors, and also a city where all cultures clash, because it lies not only at the heart of the empire, which is a great melting pot of different peoples in and of itself, with loads of different cultures spread across the empire, but it also has significant populations of Kislevites, of Wastelanders, of Cathaeans, of elves, of dwarves, of halflings, of a great deal more besides, all of whom have influenced the local architecture inside the city. So loosely speaking, that means you can go wild and go with almost any color that you prefer, but terracotta appears to be one of the more common ones, particularly because we're drawing from the older versions of how that city has been presented in a host of old art pieces. So hopefully that helps a little bit. Let's pop down to Dominic. Happy Sunday, Andy. Happy Sunday in return. I didn't expect to be doing this. I expected to be sitting back and letting Sotek hopefully take over while I don't know, do an intro and then do some sort of pithy, potentially witty conclusion. I even went and reread the Skulltaker novel for today, which, Blood for the Blood God, for those of you who don't know, by C.L. Werner, which I hadn't read for so long that I had literally forgotten the whole book. And it was an interesting reread, of which I have several opinions, which we will be sharing probably next Sunday. So that'll be next Sunday if you want to watch our Skulltaker stream. Not quite scream. Stream. We'll be covering Skulltaker the week after. Anyway, if you could make a House of the Dragon style show for Warhammer Fantasy, oh yeah, what houses factions would you want to feature? So one of the difficulties with doing a show of this kind is exactly the same problems that were confronted to the producers of Game of Thrones, and that's that if you look at the novels, there's a ton of households, many lesser ones, and the Empire is the same. Take a look at just Reichland, for example. We've got ourselves the core house that rules at the top, the House of the Emperor, Karl Franz himself, Holzwick-Schließen. And that household is pretty well detailed, but even in its details, it's got some contradictory components. And underneath that, you've got almost 70 lesser houses, the prime estates of Reichland, the Reichland estates as they're often called. So that's 70 different interwoven families. And each one of those often has anywhere of up to in some cases up to 10 to 12 different noble houses swearing to them in turn in a great feudal chain. That's just Reichland. Now, obviously, if we wanted to portray a Game of Thrones just for Reichland, we'd have a wealth of different things to choose from. But we wouldn't just want to show the Reichland. We would probably want to show something a little bit broader, because this is the Empire and everyone's got their own favourites. Everyone would want to see Countess Emanuel of Nuln or Boris Todbringer or perhaps Valmir Raukov. It would also depend on when we were setting it. If we were setting it, for example, during the Enemy Within time, many of the characters that we know and love today are in the periphery, about to rise to the fore as they take rule. And I think that might be one of the better stories we could tell. So that means we allow both new characters to breathe and the characters that we know and love already from Warhammer, particularly the End Times version or Warhammer 8th edition. All of those characters can rise up during the course of the show. So I would probably look at an Empire-wide one, with the primary families being each core family that almost anthropomorphizes the various grand provinces we're going to focus on. And the obvious focus would be the quadrumvirate, if you will, the primary 4 cities of the Empire. And that would be Altdorf, Nuln, Talabheim, and probably Middenheim, which means that the core families we'd want to probably start off with would be, if we're going with the End Times, the Holzwig Schließens, or if you go with a different version of the End Times, the Franz family. And then we head up north and go with the Todbringer family. We go over to the east and we bring up the Feuerbachs, and we head down to the south and we come out with the Leibowitzes. So that's probably the 4 core families that I'd run with. And I would look to support them with a host of secondary characters, many of whom are the ones that we know and love. It would either be an End Times version, as in we're heading towards the End Times, or alternatively I'd tell a version of the Enemy Within, quite different to what I'm doing with Lawhammer. I would probably make a far grittier and grimmer version of it, allowing many of the characters that we know and love to stand on their own 2 feet. And if I were doing that, again, it would be the Todbringers, but it wouldn't be the Feuerbachs over in Talabheim. I'm not sure if I'd focus on Talabheim or Talabek land. I would have to think on that one, what I do with that. Down the south, I definitely have the Leibowitzes. And I'd show how the different families, some of them fall and others rise. I might actually put a stress on something like Ostland, so we can look at how the Tasseninks were replaced by the Raukovs, or alternatively we could go north to Middenheim and show how Middenheim loses control of Nordland but gains control of Middenland. That's a core one. So we probably want to look at the Bildhofen family down in Karaberg, the Todbringer family sitting in Middenheim, and up to the north the Nixes, a very famous family of Nordland, as well as the Gaussers. So for those of you who know your Warhammer lore, that will hopefully make a lot of sense. If you don't know your Lawhammer lore frightfully well, that's just a whole load of different names. But from my perspective, I'd probably look at focusing on the core 4 cities of the Empire and building the stories around those and how they may change. Okay. Right, so let's now pop down and see if we can find some other questions rolling back, because I don't want to just do our super chat. Right. Where should a grognard who paid very little attention to Warhammer Deep lore start diving into said lore? Okay, Benjamin, it depends what you're looking for. If you're just looking for dipping in for a bit of fun and not worrying too much about what you're learning, I'd probably just go with the obvious route into learning some of the stories, and that's Gotrek and Felix. You kind of can't go wrong with Gotrek and Felix. Jump into those stories and have a bit of a laugh. Alternatively, if you're looking for trying to ground yourself into the Empire so that you can do the role-playing game, I would probably start with something like the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay Starter Set, which completely grounds you in Ubersreich. Ubersreich being one of the towns in Reichland in the Empire. And it also explains all of the duchy around it. And if you've played a game like Vermintide, you'll know Ubersreich very well because it's set there. Or alternatively, if you played Warhammer Total War, you'll know Ubersreich because it pops up whenever you conquer it as you pass through the Empire there. So it's a really good place to start yourself off. Plus, it teaches a lot of the basics. Beyond that, the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4 core rulebook then expands all of the information out to the Reichland as a whole. So that's all of Reichland is covered inside there, and it'll give you a really good place to begin. So I'd say if you're just looking to get specific knowledge for running a game, go to the books that detail the place where you're going to run. And most of the games of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay start in the Empire, so the starter set and the core rulebook are a good place. If you're just looking to immerse yourself in a bit of lore, Gotrek and Felix is a great start, and really any of the novels give yourself a good bit of fun to wade through. So hopefully that helps a little bit. Let's now pop down to the bloat person. Hello, the bloat person. Nice to see you back. In some sources, Dawi are said to take back gifts of Gromwell or runic items on the recipient's death. Yes, but in other more famous causes, they haven't. Is there a criteria for this, or is it an inconsistency? I wouldn't exactly say that it's an inconsistency. I will say that we have different authors who interpret how the Warhammer world should be presented in slightly different ways. You'll find, for example, when Gavthorpe and Nick Kime were putting together Grudge Lore, they had one version of the dwarves in mind, the version of the dwarves that they were writing for the novels. Where if you take a look at what was built for, say, oh, I don't know, Stone and Steel for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay First Edition, that had a very different version of the dwarves that were being presented, because the First Edition version taking in a lot of the ideas from Fantasy Battle. And if you want to know more about that, we discussed with Mad Alfred, the author, all about his version of the dwarves over on Lorebeards, and that was just last week, so you can find that on, I think that's on our channels over on Lawhammer. So what I would do is, rather than saying it's inconsistent, I would say try not to view it as there is a black and white way to deal with it, as in we all do it this way, and just view it like different holds and even different clans have got different traditions for how these things are handled. Not only that, there's going to be different oaths and different promises sworn, meaning that in each individual existence of this particular deal, there'll be a unique set of rules built up around it, some of which will demand that dwarves get the artifact returned to them upon the death of the recipient, and in other times it won't be the case. A good way of viewing this is look at almost any institution which has rules, and you'll find that there's a lot of what appears to be inconsistencies, but it's not so much that they're inconsistencies, there's just different ways of dealing with it for different individuals. Take a look at the House of Lords in the UK, for example. Some of them were permanent House of Lords, permanent peers, as in that the title passes from one down to the other, giving them a seat. Others, it's only for a single generation, as in the person who's appointed to House of Lords is in the House of Lords and then leaves at the end. Others are ecclesiastical positions that were gained for gaining a title within the church, and if you lost that, then away you go. There's lots of different rules for different individuals, and the same will be the case here. So rather than viewing it as inconsistency, instead build up for your version of the world, assuming that you're working towards your hammer inside a game of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and then go, what does this clan demand? What is it that they do? Has there been a deed of such greatness that they will pass the artifact over to this individual and all descendants thereof, or is it just to the individual, or is it something different? And I think that's probably a better way of dealing with it. I hope that answers your question. And you also ask, oh, marvelous, my GM asks, what would the ramifications be if one of the characters tried to woo Prince Leopold? Specifically, if there were an Estalian noble lady possibly asking for his hand at the end of the enemy within. So, Prince Leopold is an interesting character. First introduced by Kim Newman inside his set of novels. Well, they were printed all the way back at the early 90s, as I recall, so like 91, 92, 93, into that area. And Prince Leopold is the son of the Emperor. And he has been pitched and repitched in a couple of different ways. I added the character back into Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4 and made it quite clear that the character was in some sort of trouble in the contributions that I made to the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay Enemy in Shadow's Companion. And in that, he's marked as not being heir to the Emperor. His heir instead goes to Wolfgang, his nephew, and Leopold is only the heir to the Principality of Reichland, and he had been banished over to the West March. And there was a reason for this. Now, that's the reason that I built, but because I resigned being the producer for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, the story that I was going to be telling for Prince Leopold was never told. Meaning that you've now got an open gap to tell, or you can take the version of Prince Leopold that's presented inside the Altdorf book, or alternatively in the Enemy Within books, and run with that instead. Now, the ramifications of it is that if he is going to end up being the heir to Karl Franz, then who he marries is of extraordinary importance, just like any political marriage. The idea of marrying for love is not an option. That will be, at best, some form of mistress or equivalent, a consort that might sit to the side if we're being friendly, if they're recognized, or alternatively, it's much less more likely that they're just a quiet secret that's off to the side. The chance of marriage is exceedingly low unless it's politically advantageous, because the court of Altdorf will be putting extraordinary pressure on using this marriage to try and gain some sort of allegiance or foothold elsewhere within the empire. So broadly speaking, the ramifications of the character wooing Leopold will be that whilst they may have all of the fun in the world, the chances of them being married is very low. But that doesn't mean it's not impossible. Indeed, PCs have fate points. They are destined for greatness in one fashion or another. Let's amend the word greatness to they're destined for something. It might not be greatness, but that means that very possibly they could get through to that. But be aware that through to a marriage, that is. But be aware that marriage is almost certainly to be disliked by the court as a whole. The court may not just move against it. They may purposely try to remove the other character so that they can, especially with it being an Stallion, remove the foreign influence on Reichland. This isn't the first time that this sort of thing has happened. Bretonnian influence has been felt in the court of Altdorf on more than one occasion. Depending on which version of the background you go with, Karl Franz is half Bretonnian. And that being the case, they don't like this. They think it weakens their line because they are ultimately at heart kind of bigoted and racist. And Sigmar is the perfect example of what everyone should espouse to. And Sigmar is an Umberrigan. It should be nothing but Umberrigan sitting on the throne of Sigmar, nothing else. So this would be a deeply political, conflicted situation. And I think that makes for a great game. So I would be pushing for it to happen. Because in the end, these are the great stories that Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay tells at its best. So yeah, I would be well up for following that one through. Right, let's see what else we can find here. For those of you who are coming in late, Lore Master Sotek is sadly ill this week. I am very sad. It's not me. I'm not the one causing the problem this week. It's Sotek. And that means, sadly, I'm here by myself and I'm just answering any old questions that people might throw my direction. For example, I don't know how to pronounce that. Is it Kyre? Is it Syri? Is it Sire? Syresco? I'm going with Syresco. Syresco. If I've said your name wrong, apologies. Question. I just ran my first Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay session with a starter set. Amazing. With people completely unfamiliar with Warhammer. Brilliant. How do I give them info that their character would know? Also, they love it. What next? Okay, so I'm not quite sure what you're asking here, Kyrie. So I'm going to speak a little bit generally when I respond to this. How do I give them info that their character would know? So I am presuming that you're saying things that their characters would know that the player themselves does not. And the easiest way to tell them is to simply tell them. Now, if it's information that you think the character might know, that's not definitely knows. Like, for example, the Warhammer world has 8 days in a week. Now, most people who play Warhammer for the first time don't realize this. How do you tell people that the basic of the week in the Warhammer world is something that they recognize? You just tell them and you say, the Warhammer world has 8 days in a week, and you know this. And today is, for example, Königstad. It is King's Day. This is effectively the weekend. And all is good. This is something that they know. You can just tell them. But if it's secret information that only their characters would know, there is different ways of handling this. And different GMs have got different preferences. And no way is right. It is up to you and how you want to run your game. Some GMs prefer to keep all the knowledge public. So they basically say, your character knows this, but no one else does, which means that the people who don't know it have to pretend they don't know. And that's role-playing, and it gives everyone an opportunity to role-play their character not knowing something well their person does know it. Alternatively, you can do the secret note. Secret notes can come in a variety of forms. It could be you take the player aside and you whisper in their ear, ha ha ha, here is a secret thing that you know that no one else does. It's up to you how you use this information. Alternatively, you can have a note prepared and just simply scribble it down or have it written beforehand and pass it over to the player when something comes up. And indeed, this is a relatively decent way of handling, for example, a skill check to know a particular piece of information. And I'll give you a clean example of this. The players walk into a room, and in the room there is a great justice, a judge who is looming down from above going, I am here to judge you for some crime that has been committed. and you want to know whether the players know the right thing to say or not. And that's more broadly and specifically. Specifically would be lower law, as in they know exactly the right thing, or broadly, as in lower the Empire. They're aware of how the Empire handles law. They're just not lawyers, and they know that they should probably just shut up. So you say to everyone can do a lower Empire test, but if you have it, lower law is better, use that instead. So they all do the test, some pass, some don't, and if you've got the notes prepared, you just give it to them. They then know what to say. But if you don't have the notes prepared, you can say, right, those who passed, you know to say this, and those who pass law know to say this, and you will tell everyone else to shut up and let you speak on their behalf. So there's no right way or wrong way to pass info onto characters, but there is a what next. Now, the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay using the starter set gives you an entire sandbox of locations that you can use during play. So I would suggest diving into those, building adventures, or just going on to the Ubersreich adventures, which are a host of pre-made adventures that you can already buy. The first of which is free. It's online. I produced that with Dave Allen, and it's called If Looks Could Kill. So you can just go get that from DriveThruRPG right now for free. And indeed, you're on YouTube. So if I'm lucky, I've already put a link to DriveThruRPG in the chat. I might not have. Let me just quickly check and see if I've dropped one into the... here we go. Have we got... we don't. So I'm going to go grab you a link for that as well. Let me just go grab that from out of here. DriveThruRPG. Here we go. Control-C. I'll just pass that onto the chat now. So use that link, go through to DriveThru, right, If Looks Could Kill into the search box, and that will give you, hopefully, a nice adventure for free. Cool. Okay, Jeff Rosier, would a stream on Shalia help in warding off the foul blessings of Nurgle? You know what? It might, because let's be honest, we really need to not be ill quite so much. And that's mostly me, let's be honest. I am almost perpetually ill because I carry all manner of horrible long-term conditions, chronic issues, which I'm not losing, the most obvious of which, sitting at the very top, that I'm willing to talk about, is diabetes. Hi, Andy. How did you change the unstable trait to fit with Lawhammer advantage system? So it's worth noting that in Lawhammer, we have got a completely modified set of rules. So for those of you out there playing Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4, if you come and watch Lawhammer, you'll find that our rules are different. The unstable trait is a trait that shows that as you're being defeated as a demon, you will slowly discorporate and return back to the realm of chaos. And broadly speaking, I don't want to tell because I don't want my players to know how it works, but EJ Cruising, there is a different way that it works, and I have written it. I might drop it up and pop it into Discord at some point. In fact, that would be a better way. So if you want to find out about how I do that, go drop that into probably one of the patron chat streams, and I'll answer it over there, because I'd rather my players didn't know, because I'm mean like that. Alrighty, so, oops. One from, oh, thanks, that's so generous. Thank you so much, Brock, 6000. Everchosen stream was fantastic. Yeah, I really enjoyed the Everchosen stream. If you've not watched our stream where we built an Everchosen with all of the community, do go watch it. It was really good. I'm almost tempted to write her up. I don't have time to write her up. I've got too much to do for my own projects to be writing up an Everchosen, but I'm really tempted. Bravo, and I hope we can do it again sometime. Me too. So much fun. Question: do you think it's better to have small towns' locations detailed mapped well ahead of time, or closer to players actually getting there? It's up to how you prefer world building. So this is really down to how you prefer to build and play your game. Some people love creating stuff, and whether they're doing it using random tables or whether they're just creating out their head and building towns and putting the NPCs in there, the different people who might live in the local baker or the local town's elder or whatever else it might be. Some people just love doing that, so they're just going to get to town and start building it. Other GMs don't like being constrained at all, so when their players say, all right, I'm hiking to the next town, they're like, yeah, okay, cool, next town, it's called, and they'll make up a name, let's call it, I don't know, Rexburg. Woohoo, we're off. And they arrive there, and the GM just makes it on the spur of the moment, and sometimes fills in the detail later and takes notes. Other times just moves on to the next part. There is no best route, because different GMs will present their world in different ways. So the answer to this is, how do you prefer to prepare? Are you an anxious person who prefers to have everything prepared beforehand? Somebody who likes to have everything to have their fingertips so they feel absolutely in control of the world, and when the players go from A to B, you've already very much detailed A and B and everything in between. So if that's the case and you're that sort of GM, build it first, because you'll feel much more comfortable when you're playing. If you're a GM that actually prefers just ad-libbing it, making it up as you go, don't prepare it. At best, have yourself a map so you know what locations are going to be about to keep things consistent, and then just run with that. There is no correct answer here. So as much as I would love to say I have the answer, I don't. I do have an answer for myself, which is a mixture of all of the above. I really like knowing where everything is and what everything's going to be, and I kind of detail out in my mind, if not necessarily down on paper, everything that could occur. And then when my players go, I just let it go in whichever way the cards land. And sometimes that means crazy shit happens. And I'm cool with that, because it's the interaction of the player creativity with whatever randomness comes from my direction that hopefully creates some of the most memorable scenes. Indeed, our last session of Lawhammer, which was just last Friday, we literally had a very famous pair of characters coming swooping in. And they came about not because it was planned or because there was any detailed map or preference for it. It was because somebody spent a fate point and kind of made it happen. And that was, for me, I think, a far better way of dealing with it than having everything pre-planned beforehand. But that was for me. So the answer to this one is, what works for you? And run with that, try it. And if you might find that, having tried it, it's either too much or not enough for you. And then as you prepare more or prepare less with each session, you'll find where your comfort sweet spot is. And that's where you should land. So the best person to ask this one about, I'm sorry to say, Brock, is you. Tanner, any tips for playing an Ogre in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay? I want to try a Butcher. Okay, so Tanner, I am going to be blunt here and say that Ogres are one of the hardest character types to play. And that's because the more Ogre you play them, the less useful they are as a PC and the more disruptive they are to group play. If you play an Ogre exactly as they're described, particularly a Wandering Butcher, it's going to be tough on the other players who might not survive your appetite. And that is not fun for everyone. It might be fun for you, eating everyone else, but it's not fun for everyone else. So my broadest tip for playing an Ogre is build a really good PC Ogre. So an Ogre that works well with other characters. Build a good story explaining why they work well. Ogres are not that bright in terms of how we measure intelligence, because they don't have the sort of culture that values many of the things that humans value, whether that's art or whether that, and we do value art of all types. I mean, we wouldn't be here because Warhammer in itself is a form of art. And the writing and the art and everything else attached to it is something that Ogres would have zero interest in at all. And their strengths, if you will, lie in their martial capabilities, their ability to hunt, to fill their bellies with the biggest creature that may lie across the horizon as their wanderlust takes them. They are unique individuals that don't work that well for a roleplay group if you play them according to how they're written. But they can make amazing PCs if you are willing to make some concessions. I would say the biggest problem with the rules that were presented inside Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4 Archives version of them was they completely missed the section of Ogres are fucking hard to play. And this is why, and this is what you should do to make it easier. And my most broad tip in general around that area is create an Ogre character that works well with the other characters and also has the patience to sit outside when the play takes place in a room you can't fit in. Now you might go, wait, what? That sounds boring. Yeah, it is. Because you'll find that almost every Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4 adventure, or indeed Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay adventure as a whole, has large sections in areas that Ogres can't fit. Now, I tackled this all the way back in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd edition with a fan expansion that I built for that game. I was writing for the game as well at the time, but ogres were not going to be added to the game, and I was like, well, I'm not having this, so I'll write myself a fan expansion. You could probably find it if you write ogres Andy Law, and in the back it's got a whole bunch of suggestions for GMs who want to run certain adventures, because ogres are going to be a pain to fit in because they won't necessarily go in. And I would say that ultimately the best answer here is speak to your GM about building a character that works with other players, and also speak to your GM about what sort of adventures are going to be played, because if you're playing in a city adventure over almost all of the locations that the players get into, you won't fit because you're so huge. You can't pass through a normal human-sized door because you're so big, and that's problematic for fun. So you're going to need to talk to your your GM, pardon me. So my suggestion is make an ogre that works well with PCs, and speak to your GM about the type of game that you're going to be playing. Laughing God, if you could import and Warhammerify a Scottish creature, myth, cryptid, what would it be and how would you do it? I've discussed this loosely in the past because I really quite like Kelpies and Selkies and the various horrific entities that you find throughout Scottish myth. And many of the Scottish myths are horrible. They're just horrible entities. There's a great deal of witches, a lot to do with the devil and various representations of the devil, often as the deal, D-E''EL or D-E''IL, depending on which one you go with. And there's all manner of great tales of the last wolf, for example, that was killed, and the devil was so upset that he smashed a great rock in half, and if ever that rock should come back together again, the wolves will return and harry the various crops of Scotland once more. But probably I would go with some form of sea-dwelling spirit that's a shapeshifter. I wouldn't necessarily go with spiriting a people away, which many a Kelpie and a Selkie and similar entity would do, purely because I would look to not tell some of the same stories as the Fimmer and look to avoid that. Particularly look at the Trow of the North, which were an inspiration for Graham Davis when he was writing the Fimmer. Particularly the Orcadian version of how those legends represent. That's also the same source for the Drow in Dungeons and Dragons. So I'd probably go with a fun Kelpie Selkie-like creature that shapeshifts and is possibly either a tie-in through one type of fish person, because that's funny, or alternatively is using the skins of others to use spells. So I might not use a creature myth. In fact, let's do it differently. I would make a new lore of magic that allows you to shapeshift using the skin of creatures and other people, because that's horrible. Ha! Ugh. Yeah, I like that. When you do Skulltaker next week, which you may note I'm not currently doing, and if you are coming to the stream late, poor old Sotek is ill, which is why we're doing an Ask Andy Anything. Are you going to cover how bad he is at his job, considering Abarash, Grimgor, Malekith, and Gorok are all thousands of years old? To a degree, yes. And I'm also going to say that Skulltaker is absolutely very much not bad at his job. In fact, I might go a little bit further and say that Skulltaker is one of those rare characters who's quite extraordinary. So this, to a degree, will be covered. And I know, at least from my side, I'm going to be making quite a few observations about Skulltaker that some people might find a little bit controversial, or might go, oh, because I think Skulltaker is a fascinating character and one that has been used to various effect in different places. So thanks very much for that one, Tyrant. Dinoman, hey Dinoman. Let me just mark that. Hi Andy. So not so much a question, but an idea. Oh, I do love an idea. I think a cool way to create Kypris would be to merge ancient Greek and late medieval Renaissance aesthetics. Good idea. A good example would be using the barboot helmets, which were from the 1400s, but look very similar to ancient Greek Corinthian helmets. Yeah, they do. So Dinoman is offering one of the great kingdoms of the Border Princes, or the Borderlands, which they're sometimes also called, that was missed out in the old world. They do have the Cyprian road marked in their maps, but they don't have Kypris marked. Kypris being one of the long-standing potential ancient sources of humanity in the Border Princes that has been kind of mentioned here or there in various sources, but very often just gets missed because it's a border prince that has stood the test of time. The border prince is, its general character is anyone can arrive, become a king, get beaten down by their mate, someone else arrives next week, and it's a place of chaos. Almost like it's a joke about the Balkans, and not necessarily a very kind joke at that. In this particular case, though, Kypros stands as a counterexample of that. A kingdom that has stood since classical times, when classical was a spoken general language, and is one of the potential roots for the classical language. So it's thousands of years old. And I'm loosely going to say, Downer Man, I agree. I think that having a unique border prince's civilization that can speak to one of the sources for classical is completely worthwhile, and having that almost Greek style Mediterranean influence in the south of the old world is something that I feel is currently massively missing. It gets hinted at again and again in various books, but very rarely nailed down. So I think this would be a great idea. Bernard Damerval. I'm going to say Bernard because I'm British and Bernard is a good name over here. If I may contest something, I think so too. I think Ogre Society actually produces a form of art and does value it, just not what humans recognize as high art. Ogres do love their campfire stories, right? And in fact, Bernard, I agree. When I was saying what I was saying, ogre culture values different things, and it values them in a very different way. The campfire stories are not just simple ogres hanging around telling a story. They're often acting out various parts of it, much to the amusement of their peers. And it will often turn bloody. They are a very visceral species, and they prefer to see rather than simply say. Indeed, the idea that ogres even sing is somewhat controversial in some quarters. I remember when they did the advert for Total War, there was an actual commentary or four on various Warhammer forums saying they've already been marked as having zero cultural interest in song at all. They like boastful shouts. They shout and they scream. Their idea of a song would be just sit there boastfully crying about all the amazing things that they had killed. Almost the equivalent of their campfire tale. A human listening in on an ogre campfire tale would be pretty unimpressed with the storytelling capabilities of the ogre, where the ogres would all be enormously impressed with what the ogre was doing and would listen to the human variety and get utterly bored. It just isn't their thing. 100% not how they value stuff or indeed tales. So yeah, I agree. Ogre society has a deep culture. It's just values, its values are so very different to humans. They are, in terms of humanity, deeply, I mean, if you wish to go down such language, neurologically divergent. Their patience is much, much lower. In terms of standard humanity, they just don't fit at all. But they are the ultimate, slightly contradicting this, chameleons, in that they can fit in with any society, which is why this is why they can make good PCs in play, because they will take on board any society that they're in. So for example, if they're in the Empire, they'll often wear clothing of the Empire. They'll try to wear bits of armor from the Empire. They will emulate things that they see. They won't understand it. They're a little bit like a spider making a web, a blind clockmaker making its way around this web, doing it not because the spider has a brain that goes, today I'm going to make a pretty web, and it's going to be the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. Come dawn, when the light shines through it and all the dew casts sparkling, scintillating light. The spider doesn't care about that. It just makes a web. And then when it's finished, it waits for its prey. And it's not thinking at all because its brain is basically a tiny little machine. And the ogres, much like humans, are bigger machines on a completely different level. And when the ogres are copying, they're not doing it because they are trying to be like humans or whatever. It's almost an inbuilt survival mechanism, like they are, for example, a pre-built species by an ancient spacefaring silver-shipped race that wanted the ogres to have a particular capability of fitting in anywhere, including in, for example, armies of chaos, where they can wreak havoc sometimes. So yeah, I'd say that their cultures just simply values different things, and that their expressions of culture generally terrify humans because they're often big, shouty, bellowing celebrations that involve a lot of alcohol, a lot of food, and often dismemberment. Hey Sammy, starting a 40k game soon. Excellent. And I was wondering on your thoughts on the Emperor 40 and any 40k games you've done. Also, you missed a super chat near the start by Sal CK. Did I? Okay, super pro. Let me just dial back and see if there's one there. Yes, you did. So I've got that one. I'll get that one in just a second, Sam. And apologies, Charles CK, for missing that one. Starting a 40 game soon. So I have run several 40k games. I was involved with the 40k role-playing game for a while. Did a whole bunch of maps for that too. In fact, I did the very first maps of the Calixis sector. That map was that map for me was a slightly terrifying map because most of the work that I had done for Black Industries and Black Library. So Black Industries was the role-play wing of Black Library. And most of the work that I'd done for them had just circulated inside Black Library, got its approvals, and then got kicked out. But because the new Dark Heresy game, as it was at the time, was deemed to be so important to Games Workshop and ensuring that they nailed 40k down hard, it went all the way to the studio, got passed around, and went all the way up to John Blanche. And it came all the way back to me with the notes from John Blanche as to what should be done. And that was, for me, a fascinating process to see the email chink, which basically said, maybe change this, maybe change that, maybe change this, maybe change this. And then John Blanche said, nah, it's perfect. Change one thing. I want the colors of these particular lines to go to this color instead of that color. It'll bring balance to the whole thing. Leave everything else. And it all came back saying, I agree, I agree, I agree. Until it got sent back to me again. And I was like, color change, finished. Brilliant. Best note ever. I was delighted. More of my thoughts on the Emperor. The Emperor, our good old corpse Emperor upon his throne, who is a beautiful mixture of Emperor Huon from the Dorian Hawkmoon novels by Michael Moorcock and the Atreides over in Dune, who eventually becomes the big worm Emperor afterwards. The Atreides line as a whole, not just... Well, it's Leto. What do I think of him? That's an interesting one. I think he should die. I think that would make the setting much more interesting and would make for a far better overall thing. But that's never going to happen because their corpse emperor on a throne is such a core component of their setting. This is so broad that it's kind of hard to pin down this one. I think 40k has become problematic. That's what I think. And I think that a lot of people have used the... no, I'm going to take this in a different angle. I think a lot of people have lost sight that 40k was a deep satire of fascism and the horrors of too much centralized control and how the state can become a machine of misery. And too many people have missed that point and turned it into a realm of heroes. And the heroes are the fascist state. And I don't like that. I find 40k often difficult to absorb these days for all it's full of so much cool that I absolutely adore. I have been sunk into 40k for most of my life as much as I have Warhammer. I've written bits for it. I have played games. I have every single publication it's pretty much ever had. And as it moved from the first generation of writers to the second generation of writers, I would particularly say the very strongly Andy Chambers version of 40k into Andy Chambers leaving and the next breed of 40k coming in. The next set, it lost a lot of its grim, brutal satire, and it just turned into a grim, dark world of heroes against everything else on the outside. So I have an issue with the modern 40k, and this is not something that I would normally wax in lyrical about or normally talk about. We've discussed it in some previous Lore Beards, but it is why I no longer work with 40k, because I remember doing a particular thing for it. I won't say what I was doing, and I got the note back which says, no, it needs to be more heroic. And I was like, wow, okay, I'm right. What I had done was already, wow. You want me to say that the massacre that is being done here is the outcome of heroes rather than allowing any sort of moral judgment to be laid upon it? And the answer was yes. And I was like, I think I might be done with this. I'm not entirely happy with writing that sort of material. I'm the sort of person that has a relatively high moral threshold. When something feels like it's uncomfortable to write, I'd just rather not write it. So I know that might not be the best answer, but I do love 40k deeply. So it's that lovely love-hate relationship that I sometimes have with it. Charles CK, perhaps too broad. Can you please expand on your issues you had with Veilguard's writing? Yes, you said you liked it, but you had a lot of critiques. I feel the same. So, Veilguard is the most recent Dragon Age game, which was not a success. And it wasn't a success for a variety of reasons, and not, I would suggest, many of the reasons that a certain aspect of its, let's say, audience would like to call it out for. Dragon Age, its writing, for me, felt like they didn't like what had come before. Now, I'm quite a fan of all the Dragon Age games that came beforehand. So that's Dragon Age, the first one, Origins, Dragon Age, the second one, Dragon Age 2, and then Dragon Age Inquisition. I enjoyed all of those. I played all the little sub-games as well, including the crappy little online games, the one involving, I can't remember the name of the family and their glass-making opportunities, all the various stuff that came with it. I've played them all, and the world is deep and fascinating and interesting, and Veilguard just overwrote huge chunks of it to tell the story they were telling, that was very black and white in comparison to what had come before. I didn't like how it handled the Darkspawn. I didn't like the Darkspawn rewritten into a new form again. They seem to do that with every game anyway. I didn't like the greater use of modern language. I didn't like the loss of accent, where in previous versions, each of the accents have been deployed for different cultures in the Dragon Age setting. Come the most recent one in Veilguard, the accents were just whatever the hell they fancied for each character, and it was for me really jarring. I felt that Veilguard didn't respect the overall lore of the previous games, and we're just writing a new story. And for me, that upset me a bit. But this isn't uncommon for games. I would have been fine if the story they were telling was awesome. And the story they were telling was kind of awesome. It had lots of ramifications, but it sort of got rid of a lot of the things that I really liked about Dragon Age to make their story work. It made Solus both a better and worse character. There's a host of things I had issue with. But I'd say if out of all of it, the bit that I had largest problems with, much of the language felt more modern than they had been using previously. And it felt out of place. So my biggest issue was it was a jarring change of direction and not one that I preferred. So I hope that answers that one. And thanks very much for calling out that one was missed earlier, because I did indeed miss that. So let's now dial down, and I think we are possibly here. Let's find out. Hi Andy, said the CEO of Necromancy. Someday, hopefully in the near future, I'll be playing Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Marvelous. I was wondering what your advice would be for playing a Heavens Wizard, like portraying the quirks and personality of the Blue Wind. So Celestial Wizards, it depends upon how you are, what your character is. If your character is coming from the Empire, which I imagine it probably will be, Celestial Wizards tend to have a far longer apprenticeship than the other colleges. So it might be worth making sure that whatever character that you've had has finished their apprenticeship, or is just on the cusp of finishing their apprenticeship, about to graduate as a full Celestial Wizard. Celestial Wizards have got more than one type. And if I was to split it up into very broad types, I would say on one side you've got your seers, your prophets, almost those who can see the future in one fashion or another, and they generally do so by using a very classic standard of astrology, by looking up to the stars, measuring the stars, drawing out charts, and using those to create long-term charts for the situation they're in, the different other people they have. They tend to be somewhat focused on their mathematics and the differences between one observation and the next observation, because the blue wind rises up at night and creates this great big, let's call it a distortion between where the stars should be and where the stars are moved by the celestial wind. And it's measuring the distortion from where the stars have moved to, from where they should be, that the future can be gleaned. One common big quirk is an obsession with the stars, with working at night with big towers and finding a place where you can observe the stars and all the small changes that the celestial wind is making to the objects that are in the sky. It's worth noting that this also comes down into the more terrestrial side, not just the celestial side. So they're not just celestial staring up at the sky, they're also looking for omens and various signs in the environment around them. And some celestial wizards have got spells that manipulate these. Some of them will do their spells by literally using another form of foretelling or future telling. That could be anything from cutting an animal open and seeing how its guts spill out, a very common one, or basic stuff like tea leaves or gazing into a crystal ball. Crystal balls are very common for the Blue College as well. Loosely speaking, anything that allows you to scry something in the future is something that could be tied up with your Blue Wizard, and you'll have your own ways of foretelling things. And these will be manifest in the various spells that you have. Alternatively, you might have yourself a more elemental version. And the more elemental versions of the Celestial Wizards tend to be focusing in on lightning, stuff coming from the blue, bolts from the blue in particular, lightning crashes coming down from above, or alternatively wind as well. Now, they're not necessarily as strongly tied to wind as the Grey College can be in some cases, although on the weather side, the Grey College tends to be much more mist and rising fogs and a great swirling storm that obscures everything. But the Celestial magic does have a lot of wind involved, indeed great gusts of wind, some that can push back entire regiments of forces. So you've got lightning bolts and gusts of wind, and indeed flying as well for the Celestial College too. The more air-based elementalist side of how the college manifests. But broadly speaking, I would suggest reading any of the books that your group is using. If you're using 2nd edition Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, read the Realms of Sorcery book on the Celestial College. There's only like 3 pages there. There's not very much. Read that, absorb it, and it'll give you a good idea. The version that's in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition is completely different, but also kind of the same, in that the college is in Altdorf. In the 2nd edition, they're spread across Altdorf, but in the 4th edition, they're all put in one place beside the University of Altdorf, which is super, super weird because it contradicts every other source that came out beforehand from every edition of the game. But if that's the world you're playing in, read that, because it's going to be important that that's how you understand your college and learn how their college manifests its various graduations. But broadly speaking, if I was playing a Blue Wizard right now, I would probably go for the more foretelling one, because that provides a little bit more role-playing opportunities and allows you to be all obscure and see things in the future that are very odd and make people go, what's he talking about? Which can be sometimes fun if played right. Right. Bernard, is that the one that we heard earlier? Campfire Stories? Yes, it is. So that means we can go past that one too. Sammy. We've done Sammy already. So it's cool. We get there in the end. Trying to use some Scottish Gaelic in my D&D setting, but it's just incomprehensible. Understandable. You Scots just are barbarians. This is not unfair. And I mean that in the OG sense. Yes, so Gaelic is, Scottish Gaelic in particular, is a super fascinating language that everybody pronounces incorrectly in so many ways. And it is, for those who speak Scottish Gaelic, a deeply disappointing thing, particularly when other people use their language and culture and then mispronounce it entirely and claim that's okay because it's their own fantasy version, they can use it any way they want, and they're left just feeling very frustrated. I don't think it is incomprehensible. I do think, however, that it has altogether far too many vowels, but that's just my own personal preference. Okay, dialing down now to... Hey, Josie! Selkies are very cool also, hello. Hey, Josie, I'm glad that you're out there, possibly still watching, possibly not. That was posted how long ago now? That's posted 10 minutes ago. You might have already moved on, but if you're still out there, love you loads. And, you know, Brian came up with the idea of a Cainite flagellant as a possible PC. Like it. How achievable do you think it would be for someone to try mastering Cain's Rage? So I think a Cainite flagellant fits. You could make that work, although I would be very careful on how you created it and told it stories that it didn't devolve into something that ended up looking like it was effectively corn, which you really don't want. And there is definitely a touch of making the blood flow here. And that might be to your preference. You might actually prefer to have your version of Cain in your game being close to corn, possibly even related, possibly even being the same thing. Not my preference, but that might be your preference. I think this is very achievable. I think it would work really well with careful writing. And I don't think anyone can really master Cain's Rage. Anyone. But I do think that it makes for an interesting character to try and do so. And attempting to manifest that rage, or alternatively through a different route, attempt to control that rage, I think would be a really good thing. So I think that's a great idea, yeah. E-rank luck. Can you tell us more about Nahmud, aka the Dark Black Maiden? What was in those scrolls that scared those Myrmidians to murder? So, for those of you who don't know what this is referencing, inside the Tome of Salvation, which was a book for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd edition, there is a monastery called the Monastery of the Dark Maiden. Now, it is a Leorican monastery, founded by a chap called Leoric many hundreds of years earlier. And these Leorican monasteries taught warfare and strategy to the various students that came there, and they became a core source of warfare and tactical strategic knowledge in the Empire, and in many respects made many believe that Myrmidia was nothing more than a goddess of war and strategy, largely through the Monastery of the Dark Maiden, where in truth, if you go down to Tilia and Estalia, you find that Myrmidia is a far broader goddess, still holding many of her original tenets, which were based around more of a civilizing god or goddess, depending on how the language you prefer. But she was a far broader goddess of the south, much like Sigmar is far more than a war god. But outside the Empire, most people see Sigmar as nothing more than a war god of the Empire. So many people view Myrmidia somewhat similarly as the war god of the south. But in the Empire, Sigmar is so much more than that. Down in Estalia Tilia, Myrmidia is so much more than that. Now, Nahmud herself, the Black Maiden, comes from the Babylonia Myrmidia, which is one of the great holy books of Myrmidia. And in there, there's a story of Myrmidia meeting an individual by the name of Nahmud, who was a Southlander. She was known as the Black Maiden because her skin was as dark as midnight. And there's a whole little story about her meeting up with Myrmidia. Things happen, and Myrmidia leaves a stranger in a strange land, heading off to go and do her own thing. And there's a nice little snippet there where it discusses how Nahmud became a great source of inspiration for poets, where they would often refer to people as a Nahmud man or a man in Black Maiden dress or some equivalent to show the terrifying nature of that individual or the noble nature, because the Black Maiden herself was said to have been of great noble character. But beyond that, very little is explained. Beyond that, the last bit, scrolls. So the temple itself, the Monastery of the Black Maiden, is built over some scrolls that were secured far in the south. Scrolls that, when they were read, were deemed to be so heretical they could not be spread anywhere. And they were what founded the Leorican mission, the whole point of the Monastery of the Black Maiden. And they were so dire that the person who translated them, an elf, was murdered. To ensure that that elf told no one else what was said in there. Now, it was a great fact about Myrmidia and Myrmidia's life before Myrmidia sailed off into the west, having been effectively assassinated by Scaven. So she's dying and she heads off to return to the realm of the gods. What was in there? I'm not saying, largely because the whole point of that piece, for all there was an answer for my game, so in Lawhammer, there is an answer. But in Warhammer, there isn't. I didn't write one. I purposely left that door open so that individual people using it could do their own thing with it. I've had a lot of different ideas pitched to me for what it might be. And even doing those sort of suggests what it isn't. Because if I say, someone said this to me, in some respects you might go, so you don't think it's that, it's something else. So I don't even want to say those. I would much rather leave it to your own answers. So I will happily discuss Nahmud, the Dark Maiden, who she is, where she came from, and where she was involved. I mean, she came from the Southland. She came up to Myrmidia. She met Myrmidia, and then after meeting Myrmidia at a great battle, she left. And then the scrolls of Nahmud are her own personal journals. So there is something in those journals that other Myrmidians felt were so heretical that no one else could ever know it, and they would keep it until the end times. So what that is entirely up to you, but I know what it is for my game. Sorry for not answering that frightfully well. Hey, Watchdog! Hi, Andy. Sorry to hear about Sotek, as am I. He is, of course, ill, so if you're tuning in later on in the stream, Sotek is sadly not with us this week because he is currently ill at home in bed with a thermometer sticking out of his mouth, sweat dribbling down his brow, shaking terribly. Hope he gets better. Me too. He and Nurgle do not get on well. Unlike me, Nurgle and me are best pals. I pretty much speak to Nurgle every week, and I'm ill like every other day. What would be your dream 3 or 4-way Warhammer battle? Ooh. It's a good question. Okay. My dream battle would be a recreation of one of the end times battles in a fashion that I felt was a better resolution for the whole story than what we currently had. But to answer that would be to answer the entire end times and then state what would be the 3 or 4 way battle that would be at the heart of the conclusion that heads towards our version of the end times. So my dream battle would be a different retelling of the end times. I would love to see the end times revisited, and I don't mean let's go through the end times again. I mean simply that I would love to see the end times revisited in the same way that Age of Sigmar has been revisited. And that, in essence, is the first edition wasn't that great, but the second edition made it better. And as each edition went on, they refined the story and they made it better. And I would like the end time story to be refined and made better. And that is what I would like to do. If I was having a dream battle, I'd definitely do that. Pancreas's silliest clown. Would you prefer to have 5+ civilizations in the Border Princes and see the Border Princes fall out of use? No, I wouldn't. I would like to see the Border Princes very much stay in use, but I would like there to be at least 3 or 4 core Border Princes that stood the testament of time, either because they were ancient and possibly destroyed, and their ruins are still there, and it's this ancient ruin of, say, for example, Kypris, or Kypris had stood all the way through and was at the heart of many of the Border Princess stories, perhaps tying back to Dark Omen, the computer game, in Shadow of the Horned Rat, where we could have our Border Princers coming from there. That would make a certain amount of sense, because they were a very established force with the same military discipline as one of the state armies of the Empire. They were an established group that had been there for potentially not just 5 to 10, 20 years, but a long time. So I would like to see, perhaps, if the Border Princes were to be properly revisited, maybe about 4 or 5 we've been here for ages Border Princes that could really help characterize the area with its own unique cultures. Because that's something that's completely missing, and that is Southeastern European cultures in the old world. We just don't have any. What we have is some version of the Holy Roman Empire, a sort of Italy, sort of Spain, Estalia, sort of Britain, Albion, sort of France, Britonia, but more English Britonia if we're honest, a sort of Russia. But there are so many massively awesome stuff down there, most obvious of which many would immediately fall back on because of most people's universal knowledge of Europe is Greece, because of its strong influence on the foundation points of much of what we see as Western philosophy. But there's so much more beyond that alone. So I would definitely like to see maybe 4 or 5 really cool locations built there, and then the rest of it be the Border Princes that we know, some of which may have lasted for a couple of 100 years, some of which are really short-lived and have just risen. A lawless land of warring disparate groups in much the same way that the Empire was some 500 years ago. So I would very much like to see something like that plus. So I think, Pancreas, you're on it, a good idea, but I wouldn't like to see the Border Princes fall out of use. I think it's got a lot of utility for the game, particularly for GMs who want to create their own world, or players who want to create their own old world setting. They can do so in that area, and I think that's great. I also think it's really good for Warhammer old world battles, because it's a place of constant flux where you can have almost any faction infighting down there, which is super fun. World 7. What do you think of the Malazan books in that world? I think they're great. I have not read them all. I fell out of them around about book 5, 6, purely because my house was flooded. And I was out of my house for some 4 years. So I just fell out of everything I was doing at that time. Indeed, I'm going to be mentioning that when we do our stream in Skulltaker, because Skulltaker has got a close relation to that. So I think the books are great, and I should go back to them one day and reread them. But I have a lot of other things on my plate first before I do. Tyrant 25! You're going to be born into the Warhammer world. Oh, what would you want to be? Okay, so if I have to be, probably an elf. Although my soul is doomed purely because I now have time. Dwarves don't have time, and they don't last that long. Humans are mutable and prone to dying very quickly. I'd probably be a mutant before I was 3. No, none of the realms of humanity are particularly safe. The safest one in the current publication is Cathay, and even that's riddled through with terror, particularly because dragons rule it. So yeah, I would probably want to be an elf if I was born into the world. That would give me the most chance for a long-term life. None of the elves, though, are particularly palatable. The Aeonir possibly the most, depending on which version of those you go with. So that's the elves of the old world forest of the Laurelorn. There's another part of you that goes, hey, I want to be a dragon, because yeah, then I'm going to be much bigger. But hey, they get hunted down by almost everything. Super dangerous, and chaos wants to turn you at every corner. Yeah, being born in the inner kingdoms of Ulthuan is one of the safest places you can be in the whole Warhammer world. So that wouldn't be bad. But I don't think I would like to be born in the Warhammer world, truth be told. It's a bit of a mess there. Yeah. Hey, Aleph. Long time no see. I'm working through Gav's Sundering Omnibus. Nice. Any thoughts or divergences in the elves from those books? Curious about your Hellebron and Marathi inventing the idea of religion as opposed to faith. Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. So... that's a toughie. You've asked me a real toughie here, Aleph, because I have a lot of strong opinions about elves, and they predate Gav's writing here, and they also come after Gav's writing here, because many of the ideas that I've taken on have come from Gav's writing. His Sundering Omnibus, I feel, is... it makes some choices I preferred wouldn't have been made, and I'm sure Gav and I could happily hash that out. So if you happen to be watching, Gav, and you want to talk it out, let's do so. Yeah. So I'm going to take this in a slightly different way. When I was talking with Gav about what we were going to do with the Past of the Old Ones books, and we were discussing the elves of various stripes and what we were going to be doing with them, this didn't come up, but it sort of did in an oblique way. And I pitched an idea for how some things could be done. And I said, maybe we could do it this way, which would mean this, which would muddy the waters here, which would come out with a different issue. And Gav said, yeah, sounds great. Let's run with that. So if I'm to answer this as faithfully as possible, I take those books with not a pinch of salt. It's not I have to season it to taste completely, but I do, to a degree, always, when I'm viewing almost any Black Library book, view it as a version of the history. And you kind of have to, because all the authors have taken different views of how certain things work, and they don't match. And in this case, my views don't quite match with Gav's. I don't want to say in what way, because I think it'll become very clear when I finish my path work. So that's the extras that I'm creating for my own game for the elves, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay game that I'm playing with Lawhammer. I have a host of elf extras that are being built for that. Indeed, I've just finished another part of that. And they're getting posted slowly over on Lawhammer. And I'm going to be posting all those when they're all finished posted. And I think they're all edited. I'm going to be publishing them publicly. So at the moment, they're behind a Patreon wall. But I'll be publishing them all publicly, because I publish everything publicly in the end. At the moment, it's more like I'm just throwing the ideas out. But I have some issues there. But I don't want to go into them, because I kind of don't want to spoil a point for one of my players. Adam Johnson. Hi, Andy. But in fact, no, I'm going to say one more thing before I do. But this will be answered in Lawhammer, and once I've answered it in Lawhammer, I'll be much more happy to discuss it. It's just I don't want to spoil something that's going to happen in Lawhammer, most likely. Adam Johnson, just started Anyway Within. Oh, with a group of newbies to Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Nice, new Dungeon Master yourself, or Games Master as they prefer in Warhammer. Any advice to help tie random generated characters together? Yes, but I presume you've started, so you're kind of too late to do the obvious things. Normally, I would say in your session 0, so that's before you get down and start playing the enemy within itself, that you have a conversation with your characters about where they come from, how they get together, how they work together, why they're a group that is working together, what gives. Now, in our game, in Lawhammer, we did that over the course of almost a year before we started the enemy within. We had big, long discussions on how to best make that work. So, if you've already passed that, you're now in slightly more dangerous territory, in that you've got a bunch of people who might not work very well together, all sort of following a story. So I might suggest, especially if they're newbies, that you have an in-betweeny session, which will introduce them to different ways that you can roleplay too, which could be quite fun. Where you say that today what we're going to do is we're going to discuss how your characters either knew each other in the past or are going to work together better in the future, or are going to effectively be the group that works together. And my question to you is, now that you know each other's characters, how are you all going to work together? What is it you like about each other? Why is this going to work? Talk it all out. And if you can, play a couple of flashback scenes with some of the characters who might have met each other beforehand in the past. But really, if you're playing with newbie players, it's quite important to stress to them that the game will be at its best when the players are working together. They might have bickering arguments in character, that's fine, but the players are all intending for their characters to work together regardless. An example of this is, take for example, if we go to Firefly. The character Jane in Firefly is almost an antagonist. He's part of the party, and he's going in the same direction as the party at all times, but all the time he's threatening to leave, to take over, to do something else. And it's okay if you're doing that in character, as long as the player knows that by the end of the session or the end of this bit, they will always be working in the party system. Conflict within party is fine, but conflict within the players is bad. You should all be working together towards ensuring that everyone always stays together and tells cool stories to get there. So I would be looking at trying to sit down with the players and say, how are we going to make sure that your disparate band of crazy lunatics, whoever they might be, are going to stick together for the enemy within? Because I love these characters and I want them to work, and we hope that they're going to live all the way through. But how are we going to make sure that that happens? And then just talk to them and ask them how to do it. So my advice is, get your players involved. Get them to be the ones who come up with the answers for why their characters are going to stay, and they're going to work together even though they're random generated characters. And you'll find their inventiveness will almost certainly be more interesting than any stories you try to force upon them from the outside with various NPCs saying, you must work together now. No, people resist that. Get the players to do it for you. That will hopefully help. The Awesome Rabbit. Hi, Andy. Big fan. Oh, thank you very much. I was wondering how prevalent Ungol law is within Kislev. Is it primarily just kept to rural areas or more widespread? So, it depends which version of Kislev you go with. I'm sorry to say that this is sort of up in the air thing, because Games Workshop has taken Kislev into a different place from when I was last writing from it. So when I was last writing for Kislev, it was back in the noughties for it wasn't called Knights of the Grails of Bretonia book for Realm of the Ice Queen. I got there in the end. And in Realm of the Ice Queen, Ungol law was prevalent inside Ungol settlements. And the Ungol settlements were primarily rural areas and also primarily north and northwestern Oblast, although some of the northeastern Oblast as well. Ungol rule did not rule in Erengrad, for example, which used to be a capital of Ungol society. Prague, another place which was arguably Ungol, also doesn't have Ungol rule. But that doesn't mean that the communities themselves, the Ungol communities inside what is ultimately a Gospodar-ruled area, don't fall back on their own tribal concerns. So when you're out in the sticks, the Ungol law absolutely is prevalent. If you're in an Ungol stanista, if you're in an Ungol village or town or smaller village, their elders, indeed their nobles as well, are very much going to be following that. But once you hit anything which is close to Kislev itself, Gospodar rule absolutely is in control. So if you're going with the version of the Empire, a version of the Kislev I did, it was that. But in the more modern version, it appears that they're attempting to erode the concept of Ungols and Gospodars and basically say they're Kislevites. And the answer to this would then be, yeah, the Ungol law doesn't exist anymore. Not my preference, but I would say that that's very possibly where it may end up. Beefle Call King, I might be saying your name wrong. For the gods in Warhammer, it is just the human pantheon that have sacred animals, or do other pantheons have them as well? Other pantheons use them in a variety of ways. The Hekaran pantheon has various animals associated with some of its gods, much like the Egyptian pantheon does. The Elven pantheon does at points use animals, but often it's the sacred beasts of the god rather than the god will take the form of. An example would be right at the very top. Azurin, his sacred beast is the phoenix. He is the phoenix god. The phoenix guard are his protectors. And phoenixes are very strongly interwoven with the long historied tales of Azurin, the god. When Azurin was killed, his rebirth was heralded by phoenixes, which burst out of the fire as the god rebirthed from the flame of Azurin in the shrine of Azurin where it is today. So sacred animals are something that pops around with gods all over the place. It's not just humans, but it is primarily humans. Hopefully that helps a bit. R&R, if an ogre beats an enemy and eats them in one go, are they just eating and pooping the entire time? No. Ogres have more than one belly, more than one stomach inside. And ogres go through, much like cows, they've got different forms of digestion, and their stomachs are constantly churning away on the inside. They're constantly digesting and redigesting. In many respects, they're more efficient than humans. Humans who take in the food, it goes in to their one stomach, then into their digestive tract down below, which takes some stuff, sucks some stuff out, then poops out the rest. Where the ogres, it drops down and gets mulched up by the stones they've eaten, the metal they've eaten. There's all sorts of horrific stuff inside an ogre, and it goes through multiple stomachs and passes around. And I'm not saying that ogres chew the cud like cows do, as in they regurgitate, chew, and push it back down again to get the most out of it. Instead, it's their stomachs that are doing a very similar job. So are they just eating a lot? Yes. Are they pooping the entire time? No, but they do poop a lot. But they do appear to have more efficient digestive tracts than humanity. Moving down to the Singemeister. How would you do Warhammer Fantasy Roleplays? Selkies, would you just bring an explanation about them being folklorization of sealskin using cultures, i.e. the Sami, the Finns, or the Inuit? All of those would do. And as I suggested earlier on in the stream, I would be sorely tempted to do shape-changing lore using not just seal skin, using lots of different skins and possibly tattooed skins of different types, and we could get ourselves some real conflict working amongst those cultures as well, with ones that were a little bit more chaos leaning because they'd come from the north, ones that were much more Celtic leaning, for want of a better description, came from the south. It worked really well for a northern Albion, and also over into the north of the realm of chaos area. So possibly a string of islands going down there, like the Faroe Islands and the Shetlands and similar, and having ourselves, and Iceland and similar, reaching down towards Albion, and then a variety of different cultures that have sprung up around there. And I do think that having some sort of Sami Finn or some equivalent people behind that would work really well. But would I like to get rid of Selkies as completely? No, I would like to have water spirits and sea spirits, a variety of different kinds, possibly working with and against them also. So I would probably, if I was doing it, do both, because that sounds fun. Sakar! To expand Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay into Cathay or a new big location, what's needed? New massive campaign like the Enemy Within, or just player guide setting book like High Elves are getting? Need is a very different word to want. Need a setting book. Want setting book and adventure. And I'll give an example of why that's important. In Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 1, the Empire was detailed by the core book. It gave enough detail, you're like, oh, there's the Empire, I'm playing it. But it wasn't until we saw that Empire in context with the Enemy Within that we understood what the Enemy Within was doing. It wasn't just an adventure. It was providing you with a snapshot window into life inside the Empire. Because of the Enemy Within, we have the Empire that we know today in Warhammer as a whole. All the extra detail that was required for you to play in the area, not just get a snapshot. There's this province and this people, here's a career. There's this province, there's this people, here's a career. Which is ultimately useful and helpful, but is nowhere near as good as, and today you meet these people doing this stuff, which means you have to effectively not just describe the locations, you have to describe the people and how they think and how to roleplay them. So if you really want it to work well, you need both. And my preference would be, if they were doing Cathay, if I was planning Cathay to do today, I'd do a 256 page Cathay book, and I would do a 3-book campaign with each book approximately 128 pages, and I would have that campaign probably start on the Silk Road, take the Silk Road to Cathay, move through Cathay, get up to the Great Bastion, move the campaign into the main palace where a big woo-ha goes down, whooshing compass, Emperor, Queen of the Moon, whatever else, and then moves down towards the basin and a great massive attack of the Hordes of Chaos in against the north, and how the people on the inside are attempting to unlock the bastion for them. I think that would be an obvious campaign, and then through complication and through discussion with writers, it would turn into something far bigger and better than just that very quick summary. But I think Silk Road into Cathay, meet all the weird things in Cathay, then head off, eventually meet the dragons, because that's too fucking cool. And then what are the dragons standing off against? Actually see the whole thing in practice, so you understand what Cathay actually is, the nitty gritty of life there, and the reality of what the dragons are doing. Then moving from there into the waste in the north and getting a really good snapshot into the hobgoblins and the northern human tribes that are in that area. I think there's loads of cool that could come from that. But so I think both would be best. But if we're just talking about basically need and nothing more, a realm book would, I suppose, suffice. Drachenfels, love the book. What do you think of him? I love Drachenfels, think he's great. Now, if you don't know who Drachenfels is, he was first introduced by Kim Newman, who went under the pen name of Jack Yeovil. And Drachenfels, from the self-titled Drachenfels book, Drachenfels, is a character that predates the old ones and is an ancient source of evil and is a port, in some respects, of Dracula over into, Drachenfels, Dracula, you can almost hear it. Because of Kim Newman's fascination of Dracula in general. You'll find that his main character, Genevieve, also pops up in some of his other writings, where Genevieve is dealing with actual Dracula in Victorian London. Queen Victoria herself has become a vampire. Red Rain, the books there, so the Red Rain, the reign of the Queen, is discussed in there. So I love Drachenfels, and if you like Genevieve, go check out Kim Newman's other writings, because she pops up all over the place in this almost multiversal type fashion. So yeah, I think he's great. Ricky Cypher, hey Andy, hiya. Maybe a weird one, there's nothing wrong with the occasional weird one. But first, thank you, since you pretty much single-handedly got me into Warhammer Fantasy. Delighted to hear that, Ricky. And I am delighted that you, as I look over your comment, have got into it, because I do love Warhammer. Although the one reason I haven't binged all your content is that I always begin to miss the feeling of everything being so captivatingly new. Do you sometimes miss that for Warhammer as well, given your vast knowledge? No, because I'm constantly making new stuff anyway. I have never really been someone who has been... I don't know, bothered by the new. There's always another thing being added. There's always a new bit. I'm going to take this from a different angle. I come from the generation where all the new stuff coming to Warhammer was contradicting the old stuff, so that the new was actually tinged with annoyance. Because I had to try and rework everything that I'd built up to that point to match the new stuff coming out. So I don't have that same feeling towards the new that everyone else does. I much prefer new that works in sympathy with what came before, which is why when, for example, the new High Elf book came out, from the new Player's Guide for Warhammer Fantasy World before came out, the writing of the gods in that are just terrible. They don't understand the gods. They've misunderstood how the Mandela works. And I understand how they got to where they've got. Sotek and I have discussed this one multiple times in the past. But whoever wrote it got it really wrong. Or they've just changed it completely. But in either case, it leaves me with a bit of annoyance, because I'm very used to the Warhammer 8 version of how the Elven gods get categorized. And the mixture of the gods in the new version that's presented in the Player's Guide is just wrong. Or changed, neither of which makes me entirely happy. So I don't have that same feeling for the new that you have. So I don't worry about what you worry about. And I'm also constantly creating new stuff anyway, whether I'm doing it professionally or whether I'm just doing it for my own games. It's a burning need that's going to constantly be working away in the background regardless. So if you are interested in stuff that I'm building, there's constantly going to be more. So oh, the question disappeared. Oh, hi there. I wouldn't worry too much about worrying about the new. The old world is going to be adding tons more new in time anyway. You're always going to have something new to look at. Magladroth 44. If you resist Nurgle rot long enough, you can become a great unclean one. I don't want to become a great unclean one. I would rather become just a great, relatively well for the rest of his life one. I know that's hugely unlikely, but I would really like that. Right, moving down to Necromancer Kobold. Silly question. No question is silly, Necromancer. Some friends want me to join a D&D campaign that allows for characters from any world. Yep, I have done things like this. I want to play an Eshin Scaven. Any tips for being a team player? Ha! Excuse me while I take a brief drink when I consider how to make a Scaven a good team player. Scaven do have somewhat of a pack mentality. It's right hard-coded into the rules. You get tons of Scaven together, their leadership increases. You lose them, their leadership drops. They work better when they work in a group. And if he has no other Scaven around him, then he's going to have to find himself a new group he can latch onto for good life. Now, this is to a degree slightly counteracted by Clan Eshin's core ethos, which is many of Clan Eshin work by being solitary individuals. They're used to it. But that could be also useful for you. You can have yourself a Clan Eshin assassin, a light gutter runner, promoted or some equivalent, who is used to working alone. The assassins, after all, can move into, infiltrate, pretend to be almost any species, hide amongst them, then pull out and attack, because that's super fun. So yeah, I would build a character who has already learned to be a loner, so won't mentally break down by being by himself, a stranger in a strange land, much as we discussed earlier in the stream. Slight Robert A. Heinlein quotations there. And I would also give him a loose pack mentality where in his sphere, he is looking to have those around him, not that he can trust, but that he can loosely hide behind, so that he knows he's got others that he can put before him into the danger, which over the course of the campaign, I would use for part of that character's arc as it learns the concept of being friends or some equivalent, because you're going to need to ultimately have a character that works well with other players. Now, if your campaign is intended to have a short-lived amount of time, for example, you're going to play 20 sessions, I would probably work my arc to be the end of it being me trying to kill the rest of the party. Having learned enough to survive in this new world, you move on from it. Because the campaign's going to end anyway, and that could be fun. So, I'd say possibly the best way of making him be a team player is make him bide his time. He is learning and absorbing information until eventually he reaches the point that he no longer needs everyone else. And if you're playing a long-term campaign, that time might just yawn out into the distance. That's one way of putting it. Brock 6000. What's your approach for magic that does not neatly fit into the Wind of Magic? Do you try to fit it into one of the 8, make it Dar or Chaos or the Wind, or just Warpstone, Raw Chaos? So, this is something I've done professionally for Games Workshop. I was tasked with adding new types of magic to Warhammer during the 2nd edition. And that was because a conversation was had. And that conversation was, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 1st edition had a deep well of slightly different magic types, and also had the color magic system in it. 2nd edition only has color magic, and it discusses dark magic, provides a couple of spells, discusses high magic, doesn't cover it really, and adds a whole bunch of divine stuff, but doesn't have any of the others. Can we possibly tackle these? And this conversation was had with Games Workshop, because at the time, as far as they were concerned, there wasn't other types of magic. We were just in the cuspy era where even ice magic was seen as something that possibly shouldn't exist. And they changed their mind and said, no, it should exist. And I was then given the task to write that. So I wrote that. I wrote a new style of magic for the hags, which was included for Kislev. I also wrote another style of magic called hedge wizardry, which was which were the blessed few who weren't using Dar, nor were they using the 8 winds as it was understood, and nor were they dangerous. And that was a core component of adding something new. Now, let's now tackle the question itself. So first, I've done this, and I've done it professionally, and Games Workshop liked it, and I was going to do another one. They were going to be called Pocket Men. They were going to be based around a thief book that was being written for the 2nd edition Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay that was never released. And I had another set of magic, illusionism, that was going to be created, which interestingly the old world picked up many years later, based again on Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 1st edition. And it wasn't going to be grey magic, it was going to be a witchery type called illusionism, an illegal magic type in the way that grey magic was legal. So what's my approach? Do you try to make it fit into one of the 8? Yes, sometimes. No, other times. Make it Dar. Yes, sometimes. No, sometimes. Chaos. No. Chaos is something completely different, and it is beyond most other magics. Another Wind. This is where it gets a little cagey. Now, for my own games, that's totally fine. If you've watched Lawhammer, you've seen that in action. But for official stuff, creating extra wins in the top 8, big no-no. But that doesn't mean you can't have other magic types, like ice magic, for example. It definitely exists, and it exists from the Ancient Widow, or from Mother Kislev, or from whatever else you want to call it, as those icy flows are drawn from the land and flung outwards by the Sisterhood in Kislev. So there are other types of magic, which means that you can do other things. Or is it just raw Chaos Warpstone? Very rare, but that's also a choice. The thing with Magic and Warhammer is that you can answer all those questions with either yes or no, and it's good. You can make it work. Yes or no. Another Wind, no, you can't do that, but ice magic. Actually, you can. Another Wind, you can't do that, but orcs. They're doing their own thing too. Yes, but that's not a Wind of magic. No, you're right, it's not. It's a different manifestation of magic, and this is what it actually is. So all of these questions are answered with yes and no. So sadly, that's a little bit of a hodgepodge of an answer, but hopefully it gives you an idea. Who is Gilead Lothane? I'm going to pick this one up over in Discord, because this is an ongoing conversation with someone else that I'm having. We haven't got an answer that I think everybody likes. Actually, let me see what our schedule's like. Where I'm going to check. I'm just checking the Lorebeer set schedule. Give me a second. There's something I wanted to discuss with Zotek about it, because this one is worth picking up. No, it's not there. We could see. Every once in a while, a question comes and it hits me. Because the answer is not certain. Elf, not elf. What do I go with? I'm possibly going to pick that up in a different stream, Dominic, because I think I'd like to cover this one fully, and we won't here. Because there is a question in this one that I think is worth doing. So mark this one. I'm going to mark it down here. I'm going to discuss with Zotek if he'd like to do it. If not, I will do my own stream on this one, Dominic. A rare moment. But I've been having a conversation with someone else regarding this one, and we had a slightly different way of interpreting it, and I'd like to do that. 1000 ants. Hi, Andy. Does Warpstone replace natural radioactive elements in the Warhammer world, as uranium that's like still exists? It still exists. It's out there. It doesn't replace it, but it is most certainly a fictional analogue of it. I think that would be fair to say. That many of the traits that Warpstone have come from people's fear of radioactivity during the 80s, and how it would create mutations. It would build mutants. I mean, it is a creation and a spawn of the 80s, and Warpstone, in many respects, takes on many of its traits and qualities. Maglaroth! 40k campaign update. Hivemind was unable to stop a ritual, and now Nagash merged Krell with an undead avatar of Cain. Now, to empower the next Mortarch. Oh, your campaign is mental, Maglaroth. If you have been slowly but surely watching our various streams a long time, Maglaroth's been popping in with updates concerning their mixture of Nagash's attempt to, well, do stuff in 40k. We've got an entire stream sitting about a conversation about it in Discord too. I love where this is going. Good luck with where it goes next. And one of the reasons I love it because my Warhammer campaigns have often merged in 40k elements. Earlier on, I said that I have some issues with 40k. I absolutely do. Doesn't mean I have any issues with using 40k or playing with 40k, as long as my version of it is allowed to stand. Amazing name! Random, but what in your opinion, just how skilled is Abarash compared to the crazily skilled someone like Tyrion would be cool for more on him? Abarash would probably beat Tyrion. Yeah, probably. See, let me see if I can pull it up. I should have my copy here. Tyrion's pretty good. But there are things that are better than Tyrion. They just are. Tyrion doesn't have weapon skill 10 in the game. He's skilled. Yeah, he is crazy skilled, and he's crazy skilled in general, but he's not weapon skill 10. And not many characters are, but there are some, and they are more skilled than Tyrion. Whether you're looking at, I mean, hey, even Skulltaker, he's weapon skill 9. That's higher. I need to go check up Tyrion's stats, actually. Give me a second while I just pull that up now, because I have got it here, because I do think it's worth just briefly saying that the stats in Warhammer are not something that we should absolutely rely on, because they're not always perfect. But the stats in Warhammer do provide a really handy guide. And the fiction is often dialing things up to 11 in a fashion that makes very little real sense when you see it in practice. And they often make broad brushstroke statements like, there is nobody better than this individual, but then say exactly the same thing in the next book, and the next book, and the next book after that about somebody completely different, meaning that it kind of undermines all of there's nobody betters, because apparently if that were the case, then none of the other characters would exist. So let's go grab Tyrion's stat. If anyone, I'm not watching the current thing. I think he's 9, but I want to check it. Tyrion Teclis. Oh no, that's Eltharion. Yeah, weapon skill 9. Okay, so he's almost the best, not the best. And Abarash, almost certainly better, probably. But that doesn't mean he'd win, because it's really, really, really close. That's the nature of things. Yeah, he's pretty good, 9. But then, hey, even Shadowblade's weapon skill 10. There are better elves out there. Just saying. That's going to upset a few Tyrion fans. Was there anything that stood out for you in particular about the Koresh stream, units or a piece of lore? Actually, I'm going to call out something different, Tanner. So if you haven't watched our stream already, we did a stream about one of the fan projects for Warhammer, Total War Warhammer, a Koresh project, which is detailing the snake folk of Koresh. And they came on and did a complete presentation of everything they're building, including all their art, their background, and everything else in between. And for me, one of the standouts was the integration that they had made with what they were creating with all of the existing lore. It was something that I felt many new creations in Warhammer had missed, and they integrated it hard. They made sure that everything that they had added had somehow been tied back to and related to previous editions, things that had been done, and what they were doing to Warhammerize it and turn it into something new. So for me, the thing that stood out best was that they had built something that felt like Warhammer. And that for me was much more surprising than I expected. Brian, hi Andy, I miss new campaigns in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Do you think Cubicle 7 will make a new campaign? What do you think of the new Alpha book? Okay, so loosely, do I think they will make a new campaign? They better bloody do, because it needs one. Do I miss them? Yes. I planned one to come out right after the new one was completed. So when that was completed, there was meant to be a new one called Past of the Old Ones. It was planned to come out. It did not happen. For those of you that watched Lawhammer, we are possibly going to be playing that campaign afterwards, assuming that we still want to play once we finish the Enemy Within. We're just finishing off the Horned Rat section of that campaign just now, so we only have one part of the campaign left. So we'll find out in probably about, I'm going to guess within about next 2 or 3 months, whether we're going to continue on with the next campaign afterwards. And if so, I've got quite a lot of new things to potentially conjure in my mind, because Gav and I had a ton of really cool ideas. The whole campaign is ready to go. What do I think of the new High Elf book? I think it's a missed opportunity, and I'll explain why. Players' guides are meant to be guides for players so that they can play and use this new thing and get everything they need to do with it. I feel like it should be a book that was much more concentrated on new careers than retelling the past of the High Elves yet again. Tell the High Elves past and tell the lands of Ulthuan and all that nonsense in the Ulthuan book. That's where it should be. There's a whole ton of stuff that could have been cut from there, because it's a player's guide. Player's guide should have focused on how to play an elf, what you need to know to play an elf. Much more focus on their balance, their yen-like aspects of their careers. A whole bunch of new careers. It needed much more careers. And none of the careers that they offered really felt particularly decently new and high elfy, all the high elf stuff that was missing in there. So I felt that there was loads of stuff that it should have had that weren't in there, and lots of stuff that was in there, whilst fine, shouldn't have been in that book because it's a player's guide. It should have been in the Elfwind book. I think they completely messed up the gods. I am exceedingly unimpressed with that section, while simultaneously it's almost just a copy paste of all of the god material that came before. It's in serious need of a good edit to bring it back in line with everything else that has been produced for the high elves, or the high elves have bluntly changed. The elves as a whole have changed, and if that's the case, then there should have been some commentary around it saying the elves are moving into a new area. This happened already with Kislev when Total War Warhammer said, I know you want us to do these things for Kislev. We're never doing them because Kislev has changed and has gone in a new direction. So we understand and recognize there's a lot of love for the old version of Kislev. We're not doing that. This is what it is now. That should have happened for this book. If they have changed the gods, they should have come along with a nice little blog post saying, yes, we understand these gods don't match what came before. They're the same gods, but we've completely recategorized them in different places and given them different relationships. And it's weird as fuck, man. Totally recognize that because it's changed, and change is fine. Games Workshop changes stuff. This is a rewrite, and it bugs me so much, either because it's just a mistake, and that obviously bugs me, or alternatively on the other side, it is a rewrite and no one has come out to say, yes, the elves are different now. We have completely rewritten them. So yeah, I'm not very keen on it. The things it does well are not the best things for a player's guide, and the things it does worst are sadly really bad, and I'm not very keen on them. So a slight mini rant there. Andrej, I'm probably pronouncing your name wrong, so I'll say Baronet, because I reckon that bit's much easier to say. How do you explain tech stagnation in the Warhammer world? So I have one for Lawhammer. I don't have one that is in the Warhammer world as a whole, other than the loose and oft use. Well, they've got magic and they rely on that instead of the tech, and the tech doesn't really move, which is a terrible reason. My world has an answer. I won't be using that because if we play past the old ones, it will come up in that. So in my personal world, there is an answer. Inside Games Workshop's world, there isn't one. It is an area that has not been properly examined because there is real tech stagnation that doesn't make sense when you look at the personalities involved who would be looking to innovate, and also because of the nature of the almost perpetual war that they're in. That innovation, particularly when it comes to gunpowder tech developing onwards into different forms of artillery, there is no chance it wouldn't have developed probably as far as real world technology, given how much time they've had, and given that they have species who would be interested in doing this. And they also have divine revelation who can literally explain it. Yeah, you know what? Here's how to do rifling properly, because I'm a god and I'm a god of knowledge, or I'm a demon of knowledge, and I've now shown you how to do a proper rifling that can be mass produced. So it's not just the Hochland long rifle or a Jezzail that's got some rifling built in. All of your guns have that now. We have just had a tech upgrade. Everyone in the Empire has got rifles or some equivalent. Yeah, the tech stagnation makes no sense, and I'm fine with that. I think it makes for a really good world, and I really love the Warhammer world as it is, but it is a bit of a hole that hasn't been answered, other than fuck off, it's fiction, who cares, it's just the way we like it, which some writers will happily use as their excuse. My own personal world, I have one, but I won't explain it because it'll be probably explained in Past of the Old Ones if we ever do that. So yeah, it's moved down, and we've not got many left to go. I'm going to be probably going soonish, so I'm going to get through as many of these as I can before I dive out. Any plan for Lore of Beast vid? Yeah, so Dominic, you brought this one up. So Lore of Beast, they've got difficulty verbally articulate in debate that Lore of Beast is not the weakest lore, being furry magic, not my words. Okay, so I don't have any plan for a Lore of Beast vid particularly, although I could do a video about each one of the lores. It's slightly, I tend to find most of my lore vids are left for lore beards, because I don't have a great deal of time, free time that is. So I've got my lore beard slot, which is on the Sunday, and I've separated some space over on the Wednesday, and we do Warhammer-y lore bits in those. Occasionally I do something on a Saturday, but I haven't done that for a good couple of months, not since I was last really ill anyway. the lower beers ones tend to be bigger topics or more obscure topics that get very little discussion. So we tend to go for a bit wide, but not just lore of one thing or lore of another thing. But it might be worth me doing maybe a lore of stream, maybe one of each at some point, so people can ask their questions and I can do a quick intro about what each one is, and then people can ask questions if they want to do so. So if there's any desire for that, dive into my Discord and say, yeah, I would love that. And the more people who do that, the more chance it is that I will actually go around to doing it. Let me just bring this one up just as I'm passing by. Last note you can, please make sure that you always have subtitles. And Critical Role, the ability to read what's said helps a lot when communicating or such, helps with bad audio too. Yeah, well, there's an issue with that, and that's that subtitles take forever to do. I started doing the subtitles for the first episode, and 4 hours later, I'd only done a quarter of the episode. I don't have the time to do that. Now, if there's anyone out there who would like to do subtitling for all of my episodes, I am more than willing to have somebody come along and do it, but our stream is nowhere near big enough for us to employ somebody to do that. We barely afford the equipment that we're using. We're still in debt from all the amount of money that I've thrown at this already. So as it currently stands, this isn't something that I can do realistically. It was something, though, Heladruin, that I would really love to do, because you're absolutely right. Subtitles make an enormous difference, specifically because I also have a Scottish accent, which some people find difficult. And when I'm playing a character who has a thicker accent and possibly speaking in a thick accent which isn't very intelligible, having subtitles for that makes an enormous difference. So yeah, it would be lovely to do it, but I am sorry to admit it's going to be a toughie to actually get to happen in practice. Theo Benora. Hey Andy, hiya. Is there any similarities between elf avatars and human priests manifesting their god? That's another one of those questions, isn't it? So this is one that I think I'd like to pick up in a stream. Much like when we were discussing about Gilead's blood there. So what the elves are doing with their avatars is different to humans calling upon their gods. And elves have got a very strong opinion as to what humans are doing. Humans have a different opinion. And there is a lot to discuss there. This one, Theo, I think is probably better brought up in an entire stream about it. And if I'm doing this, I think I would rather do it after I've finished my path work, which means a wee bit down the line. So when I finish my paths, my elven paths, I will cover this. But not until I've done that, at least for this one. Zach R. Okay, you're now a highly paid consultant with all the power to edit anything in C7. Good. Aside from the Cathay setting and its 3 camp books, what's next? Okay, so if I was doing it, if I was just in a position where I was changing their development process and I could release anything I wanted, you've got to be realistic. So you can't turn the books into... You can't just do all the dream projects because you don't have time or space to do it all. So what I would do is a bunch of phased releases that went around creating Warhammer fantasy roleplay, as in roleplay that's not just Empire fantasy roleplay. There's so much in the Empire I would absolutely love to detail more, but at the same point, I would be tempted not to. Because there's already tons of information out there for it, and we've already covered it in archives et al. So I would look to build 2 things. One thing would be the Warhammer world as a whole, and the second one would be the campaign that takes you around it. So say, for example, at the end of the Enemy Within, your characters are heroes who have saved stuff, or it's all gone wrong, or whatever happens. And then your next one is, well, what are they doing next? They go Salzamund, elf stuff, whatever. My next campaign would be going from Salzamund into the elves over to Nagaroth, because it's a no-brainer. They've got Lustria too, then into Lustria. As that campaign is being organized, I would be looking to build a Scaven book, or an Orc book, or I'd be looking to build a Cathayan book or a Kislev book. I'd be looking to build another region book where our compilation, our adventures will be going next. If we're looking to move from Lustria, we're never going to be able to do Southlands. So, Cathay with its own campaign. It would be step 3. Step 2 after the enemy within would be, oh, we need to get over to Lustria. Then from Lustria, we want to get over to the Silk Road. So something to fill in there, which means I would probably be doing a Tilia book. Tilia, Estalia, and the Borderlands. Border Princes. I'd be looking to work my way through there, drawing upon the old world and all the new material it's creating, assuming they allow me to do that. So that would be a book for down there, possibly 2 books, possibly 3, and a 3-book campaign that moves through there to the Cathayan Wastes, over there with the Warpstone Wastes. And then from there, we would hike it through Cathay using that campaign, possibly touching upon extra cool bits within the pawn and hobgoblins and chaos dwarves and all that sort of idea. But if I was being more general, I would be looking to have a 2-pronged release, which would be the source books and the playing guides to play them, and on the other prong, the campaign that goes through the new areas that we're opening up, and I'd just tie them all together. That means that whenever you release a new book, everyone could just move on to playing in that area because there's a new campaign built for it. It's not incumbent upon the GMs to try and figure it all out for themselves or to play a single adventure. The original idea was that you start in Ubersreich, you go to the enemy within, you go to Paths of the Old Ones, and then you go back to the Empire, and you would go into what was going to be the next campaign, which was the Orders, which would then move through the Empire into Kislev. And it would involve an Undead and Greenskin expansion. But that was all in my head. Never going to happen. Well, person, are there any characters you'd like to see return to the old world? For example, I'd love to see Einar from Mordheim. Maybe. Come back in all of his mysterious ways. Yeah, Einar's pretty cool. Yeah. I'd like to see the Phoenix King for the elves, because he's never been detailed in this battle game. So I'd like that. Can't see it happening, but I'd like that. Dwarves, no, really. Lizardmen don't particularly care. All their characters will come back anyway. Anything from there? Yeah, let's just go with the Phoenix King, just because I'd really like to see him land, finally. Just going to bring up a comment I saw halfway through there. Didn't YouTube already work with AI live titles? They do, but the subtitles are broken. So sadly, the subtitles we have over in Lawhammer, they're fine, and you can sort of use them, but it gets so much wrong. When I was going through there, I was editing the auto-generated subtitles when I was doing the subtitles, and they are proper difficult. Oh, as Cogley said, unfortunately, those are rubbish. Yeah, they sadly are. Will new Lawhammer spells follow the same RADS format as Borkbach prayers? I find it more intuitive for the purpose of overcasting. Yes, they absolutely will. It's a system that I'm also building into a game that I'm currently writing too, because it's just better. Just better. It's simpler, and you can much more easily comprehend what can and can't be done. So the answer to that, Daniel, is yes. Hammond, that accent is thicker than a bowl of oatmeal. It absolutely is. And I've hit the end of the comments. Oh my goodness. I didn't believe I ever would. Let's go back and see if there's any quick questions that were posted that I didn't answer. Here's a quick one. Possibly a bit broad. Probably you could have a video itself. But what would you think are good hooks for a High Elf campaign? Particularly for young or young elves just starting things out. I mean, there's so many things. Young elves who are wandering around are often outer kingdom elves. And they can go almost anywhere in the world. You can do almost anything as a hook, ranging from their gods, ranging from mixing with other species, to going on some form of quest, to even drawing upon older things like the Elf Ranger character from Warhammer Quest and taking a look about why it exists and turning that into an adventure hook. This one is super broad, and you're right, it could turn into an entire video itself as you could go down various threads. Young elves starting out and things, if I was doing a complete party of elves, I'd actually want them to do the opposite of what most people's inclinations would be, which is to go and adventure in the world. I'd want them to stay at home, adventure in Ulthuan, actually move through the inner kingdoms and see what they're like. Experience it firsthand. get a good look at what it's like to move through what is effectively the wood elf forests of Avalorn. Avalorn is not so different to the Laurelorn or Athaloran in many respects, and show that the High Elves are not simply our big pointy hat, white cloaked High Elves as we understand them. They are also wood elves. Or alternatively, going through Nagarythe and the awfulness of the Shadowlands up there and the Shadow Warriors that live there, good old Lithanar et al., and showing that the High Elves are not just High Elves, they're also Dark Elves. Yeah, I'd like to show that the Azure are a complex, multifaceted species that have focused themselves on a single way of living, and that is to focus on one part of the mandala of gods that have very much taken away a great deal of their dynamic nature because they have shunned the more dynamic gods like Mathlan. Who is supposed to be one of the dark aspected gods, if you will, the underworld gods, the Kairathe. And I would like to see an exploration of what it is to be an elf in Ulthuan, because that's something that most don't do. They're always about how will the humans deal with the elves? How do the dwarves deal with elves? How do you just do the elves deal with elves? I think that would make a much more interesting campaign. Let's see if there's a quick at Andy or equivalent as I scroll back up, and then I'll scroll out to the bottom because I don't see one. I scroll at the bottom and go, there. I think the odd careers like beggars, lords, and rat catchers are super cool. How can I help players think outside the box to consider odd careers? Get them to do their character generation randomly. That's very much going to make them think outside the box because they're going to get something random. And I reinforce this because some people don't like being forced down a particular railroad track, and that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. But the way that I focused on the potential of random rolls was to provide a bonus if you took the random option in the character design. This is something that I think is definitely worthwhile pursuing and possibly even boosting. So if you take the random option, which might be just a farmer, or it might just be a lawyer or a rat catcher or something that people don't generally want to play, if they get something like that and they go, no, I want to play it because I'm getting myself a little boost and I'm going to buy an extra thing and I'm going to give my character that little extra thing, then it's entirely with player buy-in. Now they want to play it rather than just simply being forced to. I also think that they're super cool, and you shouldn't make them do things they don't want to do. I think that will be ultimately less interesting. More interesting is talking to them and asking what they want to play. And if they don't want to play those things that you think are cool, that's okay. We all have different tastes. But equally, they can sometimes make some of the best characters in play. So, yeah. Hey Andy, how long Lawhammer and Lower Bears a long time Lower Bears and Lawhammer fan. Can you talk about why you left C7? I shan't. And I shan't because I'm not that guy. It was a very difficult time. And the reason I left was pretty awful. And as I found out later, was also not true in the way that I thought it was. And I found out that I had been lied to significantly by certain parties, who I shall not name. And that left me, if anything, even more upset. But it did make much more sense of some very, very odd communications that I had had just after I had resigned. None of which made sense at the time, but much later make much more sense. I resigned. I resigned for a very good reason. And then I was promised a bunch of things after being requested to do a bunch of things. And I eventually caved in and said, okay, I will do those things because I wouldn't like to have left that undone. And then after promising that, 1 month later, they changed their mind after I had done so much work. And it was a very bad time in general. Loosely speaking, I wasn't happy. That was a long time ago. Now I kind of don't care. Whatever happened. It's in the past. I literally don't care. But I won't be discussing it because I'm not that guy. If they want to discuss it, they can put their view out if they desperately wish to do so. But I imagine that would be definitely a one-sided view, much like mine would be. Because I would have a view that would probably be quite one-sided from my side. And there's nothing worse than only getting one side of an argument. And I'm not really that guy. So I'm sorry I won't cover that one as much as, yeah. Did I miss a question? Missed one question before from Brock6000. Thanks for calling that one out. Let me just scroll back. Hey, Brock6000, where are you hiding? Okay, I'm not seeing it. So let me scroll down this set of questions and see what jumps out from here. Could you, here we go. Careers lawyers. No, I got that one. I'm not seeing it. Is it the careers lawyer one? Or was it something else? If someone could type in one that I've missed, that would be great. Yeah, sorry for missing that one. And I'm also sorry to hear the break was not great. It wasn't. I think it's a real loss to not have you at C7, but on the other hand, you have more time for Lawhammer. I wouldn't have done Lawhammer if it wasn't for leaving. So let's call it a win. I also wouldn't be doing Lorebeards because I would be part of the conversation. I would not be outside able to make comment on the conversation. So that also wouldn't have occurred. So, hey, a good thing and a bad thing out of that, I suppose. Also, Hammond, if you can show me what that question was, that would be great. Gun Wizard question. What's the backstory? What's his name? Okay, I'll go check that one more time because I don't want to miss any questions that have been brought up by anyone. So I've got the approach to magic. One from Brock. Let's just double check if there's another one. And if not, if we can just post the question as a whole, that'd be that'd be better. Right. Anyway, let's quickly move through the other ones. What are your thoughts on releasing selling pass of the old ones? Is it possible? Right, so first, is it possible? No, because I would need to have a license from Games Workshop to write a Warhammer book, and I don't. That's held by Cubicle 7. Now, could Cubicle 7 have bought it? They absolutely could have. Gav and I created it, and at the end, I said to Gav, look, it might have been negative for me at the end. No need for it to be negative to you. If you want to go pitch it just yourself, I don't care even if they scrub my name from it, even though I created it. Fair enough. I mean, that could be the case, but if you want to go make that, and they said no, they didn't want it. So Gav then, when I asked Gav afterwards, I'm thinking of running it for Lawhammer, is that okay? He's like, no, you go free. Away you go. Have fun with it. So I got permission from Gav. I can run it, but I can't release it or sell it. Could I scrub off all the barcodes and make it a generic thing that could go for any game? I mean, I could, but it is ingrained into Warhammer. And I have no interest in writing up something that's basically a Warhammer thing, but not. I would rather write Warhammer or write my own thing. And I am currently writing my own thing as another thing on the side. So I don't particularly have an ability to do this or a desire to do this. Although if I was hired to write it for Fantasy Roleplay, I might, but I would do it with Gav. I would have no real interest in doing it myself. So, Hawkeye says, what are your... Hawkeye, pardon me, brings up, what's the backstory of the Gun Wizard? His name. What Gun Wizard? So that's the question that I apparently missed. I'm not sure what that one is, so I am finding that one deeply hard to answer. Yeah, so sorry, can't answer that one because I'm not quite sure what it is. I'm looking at the question to see if there's anything I missed out now. There's not. Right, and I think we've come to a natural end. If anyone has any last little things that we'd like to ask just before I go, drop it in now. I do have a couple of things that before I answer the last couple of questions I'm going to say. Number one, thanks everyone who's bought Dark Deeds. It has been of immense help over on our side. If you have bought it, do please go over to BoardGameGeek.com and leave a review of it. It will make an enormous difference for us if we've got more reviews that we can draw on for our adverts, because we're about to do a little bit of an advert push. So it would be really lovely if we had some adverts with possibly your quotation on it saying that you love Dark Deeds. So do go up down to Board Game Geek and drop it in there. Also, presuming everything's going well, we will be back this Wednesday for more Lorebeards fun, but I won't discuss it too much out loud lest he doesn't turn up. So yes, one last little one there. How to correctly pronounce Sigmar is a German name. So it's created by a British company, and everyone in Games Workshop pronounces it as Sigmar, not in a German pronunciation. So the answer is probably that. Now, does that mean that it wouldn't be pronounced in many different ways across the empire? Absolutely not. It's probably pronounced lots of different ways. But because it is being used by an English company, it is very much pronounced in the British English way. Not too much use there, I know. Shred says, what might an interaction between a Hag of Kislev or someone doing their bidding and a gnome look like? I mean, the same as it looked between any groups. The hags are very spiritual people. Gnomes are not. The gnomes are constant wanderers going from one place to the next. Gnomes are all about trading. Hags don't really have anything that interests them. I don't think there would be an awful lot that they would have in common. Depending, of course, on the gnome and where that particular gnome comes from. But many of them are off wandering, collecting artifacts, doing stuff for their burrows back home. But I don't think there's an awful lot that I can actually answer in that one beyond what the individual character would be interested in. So top tier hags and gnomes, not a lot there, but an individual might be very interested in what the hags are doing, or an individual hag might be very interested in the gnomes. So that would bring up individual concerns, but as an overall top tier, the hags as a whole and gnomes as a whole, not a great deal in common there. Right, I think we have reached the end of our little stream. Can we have a link for Board Game Geek? Yeah, let's bring one of those up, because that should be pretty easy to do. Let me just go Board Game Geek Dark Deeds. I'm just typing it straight into, let's see if it comes up. It gives the first edition for the first link with a link to the second edition to the top. And the second edition is this one right here. So if you follow that link that I've just posted, you can pop yourself over to the Dark Deeds page. It currently has, if I click on it, 17 reviews sitting over on the other side, which is absolutely lovely. And we're hoping to get at least 20 by this time next Wednesday. So if only 3 or more of you drop some links, we'll have our first goal already met, and that would be amazing. So thanks all. I am going to sign off and say thanks very much for turning up. Apologies that we had no Sotek this week because Sotek is ill, but that will be happening hopefully next week. So until then, I will see you later. Bye-bye.